What's up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? Boogie298 coming at you live once again through the power of the internet. And it's that time of year again where we take a look back at the worst games of the year. A couple of things before we get started. Number one, if you enjoy this type of content, take a look at my top 10 list of the best games of the year. I'll link that in the description box below, as well as probably somewhere up here and at the end screen. And secondly, this list is just going to look at the video games themselves. We will talk about the controversies, we'll talk about the PR nightmares, we'll talk about the other stuff in a separate video as well. Starting off the list is Sea of Thieves, and here's the thing. I know this game probably is going to be a lot higher on other people's lists and may not even make some people's lists at all. This game was mostly just a disappointment. It wasn't broken. It wasn't awful. The core gameplay was fine. There just wasn't enough content. There just wasn't anything to do. And as much as I wanted to love this game, I found it almost impossible to do so because I ran out of stuff to do within just a few hours of playing. And here's the thing about Sea of Thieves. There's a lot of upside to it. What was there was fun. They are continually adding more content to it all the time, just the same way they did with like No Man's Sky. And if you had Xbox Game Pass, you got to play this game for the price of the Game Pass. So it was fairly well priced, even though some people did pay $60 for the actual core game. And the people who did that definitely got ripped off. And Sea of Thieves exemplifies what's wrong with games as a service, as an entire business model. This game is supposed to hook you with the initial launch and get you to start playing, and then continually give you content slowly but surely to enjoy. Something like World of Warcraft or EverQuest or one of those types of games is supposed to do. The problem is there just wasn't enough gameplay there at the beginning, and the core mechanics were not that great. And charging $60 for a game like that, definitely not a good decision. So a lot of things went wrong here. It's certainly not the worst game of the year, but it is one of the worst. Then there's this game, Agony, which I went into this expecting a lot, hoping that it was going to be very, very good. I liked the aesthetics, I liked the graphics, I liked the concept, but the core gameplay was just abysmal. Not only was it kind of a survival game that was late to the genre, but then on top of that, it just wasn't very fun to do. It was just kind of like a chore. Even watching somebody else play this game got relatively boring and repetitious almost right off the bat. And graphically, Agony does look gorgeous. I mean, there's a lot of good things about this game. The sounds, the graphics, but the gameplay at its core was just boring and awful. Ultimately, it turns out to be a walking simulator and not a particularly innovative or interesting one at that. And don't get me wrong, some of my favorite games can be walking simulators that have good stories. They can be interactive movies that have an interesting story to tell. This game had none of that. It was just a slog to play, a slog to watch, a slog to play through. I just couldn't even finish it. Next up, we have Battlefield 5, and this in itself is weird to put on the list. I definitely want to put it on the list for being a game that was just an atrocity the way it was marketed. But when it comes to the actual core gameplay itself, there was a lot of huge issues as well, including modes that were not available upon the launch, modes that are still not available now, lack of maps, lack of modes, lack of content. There's just so much wrong about the core game itself. So this is probably the only game that's going to make it on both lists. Well, maybe this and Fallout 76. And when you throw the controversies and bad marketing and everything else aside, and you just look at Battlefield 5 upon its launch day, you find an incomplete game with not a lot of content and not a lot of issues that changed a lot of what was good about Battlefield 1. And it was going to be tough to follow Battlefield 1 no matter what they did. It was going to be very difficult to follow up one of the best Battlefield games to ever be released. This was definitely not how you follow it up. And ignoring the controversies altogether, missing modes, missing maps, missing content, stuff that you promised to be there that wasn't there on launch day, is a huge mistake. Another example of games as a service. Buy it now, play it later. It just doesn't work. Next up, we have one of the very few Xbox exclusives of the year, and that was State of Decay 2. And this game is a perfect example of what happens when you release a game in an unfinished, buggy state. And this game had a lot of people excited about it going in. There's still people out there who do love the survival genre and base-building survival on top of that, who are excited to play this game, but when they downloaded their game, they discovered it was a buggy, broken mess. Basically unplayable for about the first month that it was released. And this is a bit of a double whammy situation because not only is it a genre that's kind of over with zombies and base building and survival just being not something people really want to mess with anymore, but then on top of that, you have a bunch of people who are very upset at the fact that the game launched very poorly. Even your core players didn't want to play your game, and even though they patched it, even though they fixed it, even though they tried to make it a very good game, even the people who like that kind of game has already moved on to something else. I don't think anybody will be surprised to see this on the list, but Shakfu, A Legend Reborn, definitely deserves to be on this list. They had a second chance at making Shakfu great, and instead you came out with this old school style beat 'em up that wasn't fun to play, wasn't fun to look at, wasn't even similar to the original game. I mean, there was just nothing good about this game, and the fact that they let people crowdsource this is just an embarrassment. This game couldn't have been any more cookie cutter. It is just basically a side-scrolling beat-em-up with no innovation, nothing interesting, just the Shakfu name tied to it, and it was just boring and repetitive right off the bat and just not fun to play. And that's a real shame because a lot of people were really hoping for something great here. I don't understand why, though, because in retrospect, I think we probably knew this was coming. Then, of course, next up on the list, surprising no one, here is Metal Gear Survive. And here's the problem with this game. Not only was it late to the punch when it comes to survival games, just like the other survival games on this list, but add to the fact that it has really nothing to do with the Metal Gear world because it basically takes nothing away from the other Metal Gear games because it takes place in an alternative universe. So the game is just kind of boring and frustrating and repetitive and just not even that good as far as survival games are concerned. And even if you throw out all of the hatred that Konami absolutely deserves for this mistreatment of Kojima, even if you throw out all of the controversy surrounding this game and just look at the core gameplay itself, it's just not fun. It's just not interesting. It is just a terrible, boring cash grab. Nobody wants to sit on the other side of a fence stabbing the same zombies over and over again with a metal spear. Metal Gear, metal spear. Anyway, the point that I'm making is, shame on you, Konami, for this one. Next up on the list is Super Seducer 2. And, you know, it's interesting putting this one on the list because it does kind of venture into the realm of so bad it's good. It is entertaining how awful this game is. Just from the beginning to the end. And it's weird putting on this list because I actually get a mention at the beginning of this game. Sorry, Richard. You knew this was going to be on the list. You know what you're doing, Richard. You know what you're doing. Super Seducer 1 promised to be a tutorial for how to do hookup artist stuff and how to pick up girls, and it failed utterly at doing that, choosing instead to just kind of be cringy and goofy and silly and awful, and it got made fun of quite a bit. So making a second and also third game that's due out next year, guaranteed to be on worst of lists then, seemed like an odd decision. This game does do something interesting. It kind of embraces the cringe, embraces the silliness, embraces the goofiness. It is still just a very bad interactive movie, though it's a lot of fun to make fun of. So if you want to download it for cheap and you want to just openly mock this game from beginning to end, going into it knowing you're going to learn nothing about seducing women, knowing you're going to learn absolutely nothing you don't already know, then Super Seducer is not a bad download. And next up, of course, is Fallout 76. And at its core, the idea of multiplayer Fallout seems like an okay idea that probably shouldn't exist anyway. Not only can you not do the VAT system properly, not only does it not seem fun as a single-player game, but it just is a vastly different concept than what Fallout has always been. But then you add to the fact that this game launched in an unfinished, buggy state. It feels like a cheap asset flip. It feels like a cash grab. It feels like it does a disservice to Bethesda and the company itself. There's just so much frustrating and wrong about this game. Of course, it's going to be on everybody's list. And completely ignoring the marketing, completely ignoring the canvas bags and the collector's editions and all of the other issues that surround this game. If you just look at the base game itself, it just seems like an asset flip that borrows everything from Fallout 4, puts it onto a new map, makes it multiplayer, and takes out what most people consider to be the fun part of the Fallout games. Not base building, not collecting junk, but the storyline. And yes, there is a storyline there, but it is nothing compared to Fallout 3, Fallout 4, or Fallout New Vegas. It's just an empty shell of a game in that regard. Now, plenty of people still find the actual games as a service here model as very, very fun and very, very interesting, and there's no problem with that. If you enjoy this game, I want you to continue to enjoy it. But as a Fallout core fan who loves single-player games, and that's what we want from our Fallout games, this game is very, very frustrating. But even you have to admit, the game is buggy, the game has issues, and the game is monetized from beginning to end, and that's really frustrating for most of us. Now, this next game on the list definitely is worse than Fallout 76. It was so bad, the developers actually took it off of the market to go back to square one to start over. Now, this is a Battle Royale cash-in. It's a sequel to a game called The Calling, who had some innovative ideas and concepts that actually made the game stand out a little bit. Unfortunately, for the second one, they stripped away all of that interesting innovation and instead went for something way more run-of-the-mill and way more boring, and it was so poorly accepted by their fan base and the rest of the Steam community that they actually had to cancel the game and take it off the market with plans to go back to square one and fix it. I do not know what behooved these developers to make The Calling 2 in the state that it was, to take away everything, including the melee combat, that was interesting about the original Calling and turn it into this seemed absolutely bizarre. But it was a complete and total failed game, one that they pulled off the market just a few days later, so I never even got to play it. I will say good on the developers for pulling it off the market and going back to square one and trying again. I'm hoping when this game actually does come out, it won't end up on the 2019 worst games list. Fingers crossed. And then finally, what is considered to be the worst game of the year, and it definitely has the Metacritic score of 29 to show for it, is a game called The Quiet Man. And this game, when you look at the trailers, looks like it really could have been interesting, with the idea of seamlessly putting in, this style of combat that you're seeing on the screen right now with live action cutscenes. It should have been good. It should have been interesting, and it just failed to live up to it. On paper, this game could have been very, very good, but the combat system is deplorable. The targeting system is deplorable. It's almost inexplicable how this game got through development with it being as bad as it is. And then you take this inexplicable and bizarre storyline that surrounds it, and then add the short game length of 2.5 hours to 3 hours of gameplay. How did this game release in this way? I cannot possibly understand it. And it's not like this was restrained by budget. This was Square Enix, for God's sake. Square Enix could have threw money at this and made it a full-fledged, interesting game instead of a bad experiment that just went horribly, horribly wrong. And that's it. That's the worst 10 games of 2018. I'm sure there's plenty of games that I missed when it comes to mobile games and indie games, but these are the highest profile ones, the ones that most people talked about. If I did miss a game, let me know in the comments section below. I always look forward to reading your comments. Let me know what you thought about this video, and if you enjoyed it, do me a favor, you like content like this, and you want to see more of it, drop a like on this video, hit subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you can be one of the first people to see one of these videos. Now, why don't you go play a good game instead? I recommend God of War, Spider-Man, Red Dead Redemption 2. These are some good games. Smash Ultimate. That's an even better one. Let's go play some good games, guys. Thanks for watching. I love you very much, and I'll speak with you again soon.